Florida History and Genealogy Library of the Tampa Hillsborough County Libraries. Thank you for joining us at our 6th Annual Heritage Festival. And if you missed any of our events, come check back on our YouTube page next week and you'll see them all there. And before we get started learning how to put DNA to work, I'm going to do a book shout out, which will also be a giveaway book we're going to be doing. And the book is Your DNA Guide, the book by Diane Southard. And this book is for anyone who has taken a DNA test. It helps genealogists reconstruct family trees, and it helps adoptees identify biological relatives. It can help you identify a specific DNA match. Basically, it helps with anyone who takes DNA. So stay tuned at the end for some giveaways of that book. And now I'll go ahead and introduce Denise. Denise Manning has a BA in History and an MA in Library and Information Science from the University of South Florida. She works at the Tarpon Springs Public Library, where she facilitates a monthly genealogy group. As a volunteer, she co-facilitates the DNA groups for the Pinellas Genealogy Society at the Largo Public Library. Denise enjoys researching her own ancestors from Scandinavia and the British Isles, using both traditional and DNA research. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Denise, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jenny. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And again, my name is Denise. So let's get started. Now, if you came in on Thursday evening to the ethnicity lecture, you'll see that, well, you know that we covered our ethnicity estimates. There's two key deliverables we receive with our autosomal DNA test results. I think if you tuned into Drew's lecture earlier this morning, you have a better idea of what autosomal DNA is, and that's the DNA we're going to focus on today. Autosomal DNA comes from our 22 pairs of chromosomes. Of course, we get 1/2 of each pair from dad and 1/2 from mom, but that's what we're going to focus on mostly today. Now, as I said, we focused Thursday on ethnicity. Today, we're going to focus on the other key deliverable, which is cousin matches. With cousin matches, we're going to start putting some DNA to work for us. So what can we do with DNA? We can validate our existing research. That's really valuable for me. I try to be a careful researcher and I document as I go along, but there's some things that, yeah, maybe my heart's filled with a little doubt. So we can validate what we've already done with DNA. We can identify questions for which DNA could help, and of course, share family treasures. Now, I start many presentations about DNA with this slide. I think it's self-explanatory, but how it works with DNA is, as we move through some of these slides, you're probably gonna think, oh, this DNA stuff can get complicated, and it can. But we don't have to understand the ins and outs of all things DNA before we start putting it to work for us and to help us move our genealogy forward. So keep that in mind if you feel frustrated as we move forward, that you don't have to understand everything. And actually, one of my last slides paints a great picture of how even as a brand new newbie, DNA newbie, I had some awfully good luck. Okay, let's lay some groundwork first. When we look at our autosomal DNA matches, now hopefully you guys have tested. If you haven't, you will get a list of people, a list of names, and the testing company, whether it's Ancestry or 23andMe or the other of the three big companies, they're going to tell you these people are your relatives, and probably most of them you won't recognize. But you do get this list of people whose DNA, whose autosomal DNA matches yours. Now, on Ancestry, for an example, I have 17,400 DNA matches. Now, many of you have a lot more than that. Many of you may have much less than that. The reason why our matches vary is usually because of how long we've been in the United States. Now, I'm predominantly Scandinavian. Actually, all of my well, 7 of my 8 great-grandparents immigrated in the mid to late 1800s. And so I'm predominantly third generation on most of those branches. I have one branch, my great-grandmother Minnie, who all of her ancestors were colonial American, and we can track them back into New England in the 1600s and a couple in the 1700s. So I only have one branch that has been in the country for hundreds of years. The rest of my branches, I'm third generation. And you think of a third generation immigrant as not all that recent immigrant, but in the DNA world, yeah, it's kind of a recent immigrant. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your numbers. But the point I'm trying to make with this slide is of my 17,000 DNA matches, only 837 are fourth cousins or closer. Only 63 are third cousins or closer. So with the great majority of them being fifth cousin and more distant, we have to know a lot of our family tree to successfully connect those people. Now, we have 16 second grades, 32 third grades, 64 fourth grades. You're getting it with the number of ancestors that we have doubles at every generation we go back. We have a lot of ancestors. But now don't feel stressed if your family tree isn't complete all the way back to Charlemagne. Don't feel stressed. I don't know anyone who has identified all 64 of his or her fourth great grandparents. Haven't seen it yet. I've been doing this for a while, both researching my own genealogy and helping other people at the library. So with that in mind, I have a picture. Now, if you guys, any of you have sat through my lectures, you know I really like pictures, so you will see a lot of pictures. This picture is an Excel spreadsheet, and it's something I created. I took me off. That's basically, it's a sideways pedigree chart. I don't have me included because I wanted to get as many ancestors as I could on one page. Here in this far left column, you'll see my 2 parents. The next column over, my 4 grandparents, then my 8 great-grandparents, 16 second grades, 32 third grades, and 64 fourth grades. Of course, dad's side of the family is blue and mom's side of the family is pink. I'm so creative, right? Anyway, as you can see, I've done pretty well through my second great-grandparents. I've identified all of those guys. My third great-grandparents, I don't know. I have one mystery third great-grandmother. I know she's Irish. That's all I know. I don't know her name. I don't know anything about her. So if I'm looking at some of my DNA matches, and I concluded that they're probably mostly Irish, I have to keep in mind they could be connected to me through this mystery third great grandmother. Now, when I get over here to my fourth great grandparent level, which of course we connect to our fifth cousins through our fourth great grandparents, you can see that I've only identified about half of my fourth great grandparents. So I'm going to have some trouble matching up those DNA matches because there's a lot of fourth great grandparents I haven't yet identified. So the reason for this slide is to show you when you open up this list of DNA matches that the testing company gives to you and you say, who are these people? Now you know why. They're probably more distant and we have a whole lot of ancestors. So keep that in mind. Now, moving forward. Now this chart is the Shared Centimorgan project created by Blaine Bettinger. And what Blaine has done through the years, this is over several years, he has asked people to write to him, to email him with a list of known relatives, like first cousins, second cousins, sisters, half-sisters, aunts, uncles, a list of known relatives and the amount of centimorgans, and we're going to talk about what a centimorgan is, the amount of centimorgans that people match with their known relatives. Now, a centimorgan is the unit of measure to determine how close a match is, in layman's terms, back to the fundamentals of electricity. A centimorgan is a unit of measure, but it's not a linear measurement like an inch. It's not a volume measurement like a pint. It's more complicated than that. The International Society of Genetic Genealogy at isog.org, and that is on your handout, isog.org, you will find a definition of exactly what a centimorgan is. As you're moving forward and learning, if you think of a centimorgan as linear, like an inch, you'll get where you need to be. The more centimorgans you share with someone, the closer the match. The more centimorgans that a segment of DNA contains, like in length, the closer the match. Now, for an example, a first cousin shares anywhere between 396 and 1,397 centimorgans of DNA with us, a first cousin, with the average being 866. Now, I know a lot of you probably can't see that the slide's very, very small, and the picture I've included on your handout of this chart is extremely small. You'll never read it. The reason I included it in your handout was so that you will recognize it when you go to Blaine Bettinger's blog, and I also have provided that web address to print out this chart. As I said, I'm going to give you some of the tools that I find the most helpful as we move forward, and this is one of them. In fact, my mouse pad is a sheet protector, just a plain old sheet protector. On one side of the sheet protector is this pedigree chart where I have a snapshot through my 4th great grandparents. And on the other side of that sheet protector is this chart. It's my mouse pad, so it's always extremely handy as I am researching. Now, if you'd like a copy of this spreadsheet that you can type into, send me an email. I'm happy to share it with you. And I can provide it in an Excel spreadsheet so you can type directly into it. It includes TOEFL numbers, which are helpful. I'll send you the Excel spreadsheet, and I'll send you a PDF as well in case you just want to print it and write in with your pen. But like I said, these two pieces are in my sheet protector under my mouse. So we have an idea what a centimorgan is. It's a unit of measure. The more centimorgans you share with someone, the closer the match. As an example, I have had my mom's DNA tested, and my mom and I, which that's as close as you can get for a relative, my mom and I share 3,500 centimorgans of DNA. A first cousin shares about 866. Just gives you a general idea. And we'll look at some more examples as we move forward. Now I'm going to show you some of my autosomal DNA test results from Ancestry. And I'm going to show you the two tools that I use the most. I think they're the most valuable. The first one is shared matches. I think hands down, shared matches is the most valuable tool we have. The reason I say it is the most valuable is because all of the testing companies provide this tool. Some of the testing companies call this tool in common with. Ancestry uses shared matches. Shared matches in common with are one and the same. So what is this shared matches thing? Well, once you click on a match's name from your match list, you come to this next screen. Now I clicked on Travis from my previous match list. Now Travis and I are second cousins once removed. I know Travis. That was helpful. Start out with matches that you may already know, with relatives you already know. It's extremely helpful. But because I have identified Travis, when I click on Travis and then click on shared matches right here with this red arrow, shared matches, I get a sub list. And what this sub list is, it's a list of people whose DNA matches both mine and Travis's. So I know that Travis is related to me. He's descended from my maternal grandmother's sister. And so I know how Travis is related to me. So then I know this sub list of people, the sub list of matches are most likely, not 100%, most likely related to me through this same line, through my grandma Ella. So that's where shared matches can be hugely, hugely valuable. Even if you don't know all of your DNA matches, if you know a couple, you can start grouping your DNA matches. Now, the next key piece of information here, the second red arrow, shows me how many centimorgans of DNA I share with these people. Now, Brenda and I share 465 centimorgans across 29 segments. Dylan and I share 325 centimorgans across 16 segments. Paul and I share 283 centimorgans across 18 segments. As you can see, the amount of centimorgans I share with these people is kind of, you know, the closest matches are coming first. That's the point here. Now, of course, I do have another picture. Now, this picture is the old chromosome browser from Family Tree DNA, so you'll probably never find this picture again, but I love the old picture because it paints such a good picture. Most every one of my cells has this picture in it. Isn't that amazing? And this is my chromosomes. The black background is my chromosomes, is me. And yes, chromosome 1 is much bigger than chromosome 22. And then, of course, here's my X chromosome down here. I don't have a Y chromosome, I'm a girl, but I do have an X chromosome. And my X chromosome came from my mom and my dad, but only from my dad's mom, which is a little complicated, but I'm going to help you out with that later. Anyway, back to this idea of sharing a whole bunch of centimorgans across a certain number of segments. From that last slide, where we share 465 centimorgans across 29 segments, that's what this picture shows. In this case, the orange blocks are my Uncle Pat, my dad's brother. I lost my dad before DNA got to be a big deal, but Uncle Pat's a good sport. Now, if this was my dad's DNA here in these orange blocks instead of Uncle Pat, they would be solid orange blocks across the entire length of every single chromosome. Because of course I got half from dad. But because remember what Drew said, that siblings, even though they're full siblings, same dad, same mom, don't have identical DNA. That's why you're seeing these breaks and the orange bars for Uncle Pat, because he doesn't have exact DNA with my dad. But as you can see, I share a whole lot of DNA with Uncle Pat. All those orange blocks are the DNA I share with Uncle Pat. Now, Charles, my second cousin, he's a more distant relative, so I share less DNA with Charles. See these blue blocks? That's the DNA I share with Charles. Nicholas is my fourth cousin. See, I only have a couple of green blocks that I share with Nicholas. So back with that to that total number of centimorgans, Charles and I share 216 centimorgans, which is spot on average for second cousins. We share 216 centimorgans across 13 segments. What that means is, if you count up these blue blocks, you're going to come up with 13. If you add up the individual lengths of each of these blue blocks, you're going to come up with 216. As an example, I think this largest block is, I think this is on chromosome 15 here. This is the largest block I share with Charles, and it's about 35 centimorgans. So that gives you a visual of when you see that with Ancestry, I share 216 centimorgans across 13 segments. What in the world does that mean? This is what it means. The individual blocks of DNA that you share with that person is measured in centimorgans, and if you add up the total length of each of the blocks, you come up with that total shared centimorgan figure. Okay, let's move forward. So now that we kind of have an idea what a centimorgan is, and it's a unit of measure. We have an idea what shared matches is, that once we've identified a few DNA matches, we can use those known matches to start identifying others, to start grouping them together based on our shared DNA. Well, I like color too, and Ancestry allows us 24 color-coded dots. And I will show you how to access those later. But I used Ancestry's colors to duplicate my own colors. I've assigned my great-grandfather Neil, he's my Irishman, of course I give him green. Minnie's that colonial American I told you about. Julius is one of my Norwegians, he's blue, Carrie's purple, she's another one of my Norwegians. And on my mom's side, John and Annie are both from Norway. Joe is from Sweden. He's orange and Elsie is yellow. Now, wherever I talk about these 8 grades, they always have the same color. Joe is always orange. Now, of course, I've included my 16 second grades here, and there's still variations of, for instance, Neil's parents are Dennis and Johanna. They're other shades of green. Minnie's parents are Oliver and Axa, and they're other shades of aqua. So what do I do with these great colors? When I've identified DNA matches, like this person named DS, who I share 93 centimorgans with, I have determined that she is related to me through Julius's parents, Thor and Merritt. And yes, I have a second great grandfather named Thor. How cool is that? So I have determined that DS, even though I don't know DS, by using shared matches and some other tools, I've determined that DS is related to me through Thor and Merritt. So that has validated that yeah, I am scientifically related to Thor and Merritt, and we share DNA. It's very cool. Sheila, I've met through DNA. She and I are now pen pals. We're good buddies. She and I share only 71 centimorgans of DNA, but I've determined that Sheila is related to me through Bengt and Anna Britta from Sweden. And so I have validated that. And like I said, with the color coding, with using Ancestry's color coded dots, I can add color codes to these matches. So once I figured things out, I have notes for the future. You can also, yes, add notes. Like for instance, in the case of Sheila, she and I are third cousins. Sheila is the second great-granddaughter of Bengt and Anna Britta through John and Esther. I know that means nothing to you, but that identifies Sheila perfectly to me, and so that's really good information to add in the notes section. Now, here's those color-coded dots. And yes, Ancestry allows us to group our matches using these color-coded dots. So now before we go on to the puzzles that I have that I'm going to show you, we've reviewed shared matches and centimorgans. We're reasonably organized. Maybe we've color-coded some of our matches. We've validated some of our research. So let's put some DNA to work and see what we can do. Now, this picture, first of all, is my second great-grandparents, Henrik, this guy with his fabulous beard, and Ingeborg. They're both from Norway. This is Henrik and Ingeborg's oldest daughter and her 2 grandchildren. So actually we're missing a generation here. But this is wonderful because we have quite a few generations in this picture. Well, several years ago, on one of those old-fashioned message boards, if any of you guys have been doing genealogy for a while, you probably remember those old-fashioned message boards. And on one of those message boards, a woman named Judy posted that her grandfather, Michael, was left behind in Norway when he was 8 years old in 1869. She said, all I know about his mother is that her name was Ingeborg Knudsdatter. Now, in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and other northern Germanic areas, they used a patronymic naming system. If your father's name was Ole, your last name was either Olson if you were a boy or Ole's daughter if you were a girl. Now, Ingeborg was the daughter of Knut, so she was Knut's daughter. That was her last name. So yes, my Ingeborg, that came to be my second great grandmother, she was Ingeborg Knut's daughter. But with the patronymic, as you can understand, is it's just not quite as conclusive as a last name like, well, I don't want to use something really common, but a last name like Crowley, which is my maiden name from Ireland. Crowley, much more conclusive than a patronymic. But anyway, I posted on Judy's message board. I replied to her message because she said that her grandfather's mother was Ingeborg Knudsdatter, and she listed the same village from which my Ingeborg emigrated. So it was kind of compelling. So because the Norwegian paper trail is so magnificent, most all of the church books, church records have been digitized and they're available for free. From the country of Norway has digitized those. And so I was able to do some research before I replied to Judy to see if I could see if my Ingeborg had a child before she left. And yeah, it kind of appears she did. And also, that village where I found the baptismal record for Michael listing Ingeborg as his mom is also the same village from which my Ingeborg immigrated. And I found her emigration record. I had found that years before. So it kind of looked, the paper trail kind of looked like this was true. Now, again, the paper trail shows that Ingeborg and Henrik went on to be my second great grandparents, not only the paper trail, but the family story. So can we prove with DNA that my Ingeborg left a child behind in Norway? Now, as an aside, we know we can't judge our ancestors through the lens of the 21st century. It's hard for me as a mom myself to wrap my head around leaving a child behind and getting on a boat. In 1869, that wasn't even a steamship, that was a sailing ship that crossed the Atlantic to America. I can't imagine. But once again, we have no idea what was going on in Ingeborg's life at that time. And so we can't judge through the lens of the 21st century. So let's move forward and see what we can do. Okay, now, after I replied to Judy and said, I really think that my second great grandmother is Michael's mom, and this is why I think so, Judy agreed that, yeah, I'm probably right. I asked Judy if it was possible if we could confirm it with DNA. I approached Judy about taking a DNA test. She wasn't comfortable with the idea. This was several years ago. DNA wasn't quite as popular as it is now. So I let it go. Maybe a year or so later, I wrote another note saying if she felt any differently about it. And yeah, she really didn't. She wasn't really on board with doing a DNA test. She had privacy concerns, and man, I think that's warranted. But anyway, I waited. And one fine day, I opened up my ancestry matches, and there was Judy. She had taken an ancestry test. Not too long after that, on another fine day, I opened up my 23andMe match list, and there Judy was in 23andMe as well. So even without my coaxing, Judy made up her mind herself that this DNA stuff was too compelling. So now I see that Judy is my autosomal DNA match on both Ancestry and 23andMe. So once again, this is pretty compelling stuff. If my Ingeborg is Michael's mom, Judy's grandfather, Michael's mom, Judy and I would be half second cousins once removed. That's kind of a goofy relationship, but we would be half second cousins once removed. Sure enough, Blaine has addressed half second cousins once removed on his centimorgan chart. And we could share anywhere from 0. It is a distant enough relationship that we might not share any measurable DNA. Judy and I might not share any measurable DNA. It could go anywhere from there to 341 centimorgans, with the average being about 73. Well, on Ancestry, Judy and I share 30 centimorgans, and on 23andMe, she and I share 39 centimorgans. That difference, that variation between the two companies is simply they have different algorithms for crunching the numbers. You'll see that a lot, but there are going to be slight differences. You're not going to see enormous differences. So here we are. It's looking more promising. Now, one thing to remember with shared matches, it does have, I said it's the most valuable tool, but it does have a limitation. And the main limitation it has is if you come from an ethnic community like mine. I'm predominantly Scandinavian, and all my Scandinavians settled in northwestern Minnesota along the Red River Valley, some on the Minnesota side, some on the North Dakota side, but in that part of the world. Many Norwegians and Swedes settled along the Red River Valley, and they stayed. Some of them are still there, some of my family is still there. But they stayed in these ethnic communities. They all came to America with very limited English skills. They all spoke Norwegian or Swedish. And one thing about the Scandinavian countries, their languages are close enough so that they understand each other just fine, even though they are separate languages. But they stayed in these ethnic communities and intermarried. So especially on my mom's side, I have multiple connections connecting my mom's dad and my mom's mom, very twisted branches. And that's very, very common in small communities made up of large families. And so solely using the shared matches tool is not always successful because of those twisted branches. Everybody shares matches with everybody else. So keeping that in mind, even though I'm seeing that Judy and I share autosomal DNA, it's still not 100%. Even though we share matches, it's not 100% because I have multiple branches of Norwegians, and so does Judy. So once again, I used Ancestry Shared Matches tool anyway, and Judy and I do share DNA matches with my known relatives on Ingeborg's branch. And like I said, it's compelling, but because Judy and I both have Norwegians on multiple branches of our family tree, it's not conclusive. So I jumped up another step into triangulation, and this is a little bit more complicated. 23andMe has a triangulation tool, and what that allowed me to do was I could see exactly on what chromosome. Now remember back, I'm going to skip back here to my chromosome picture. Remember, we can see exactly where we share DNA with someone on each chromosome. Well, now we'll skip forward here. Judy and I share DNA on chromosome 5. Fairly good segment, kind of small, but not terribly. It's not horribly small. But Judy and I share DNA on chromosome 5 with 3 other people. And all 3 of those people have ancestors who come from Ingeborg's line, meaning we all triangulate. We all received this section of DNA, this segment of DNA from somebody in Ingeborg's line. It could be from Ingeborg herself. It could be from Ingeborg's mother or grandmother. Unfortunately, like I said, again, it doesn't confirm it, but here's way more compelling evidence than shared matches when we all triangulate on the same segment of chromosome 5. Now, mitochondrial DNA, which is the type of DNA that goes directly from mother mother to child, and then, you know, daughter to, let me backtrack a little bit and explain that better. We all inherit mitochondrial DNA from our moms. I have two brothers. We inherit identical mitochondrial DNA from our mom. I passed the mitochondrial DNA onto my children. My nieces and nephews, the children of my brothers, have mitochondrial DNA from my sisters-in-law, from their mothers. So all of us inherit mitochondrial DNA from mom, but only we females pass it on. So once again, I couldn't use mitochondrial DNA in this example, in this case study, because Michael didn't pass on his mitochondrial DNA. He got it from Ingeborg, but he didn't pass it on. And of course, Michael's no longer living. So once again, really compelling information. Shared matches tool worked, triangulation tool worked. This is getting good. So let's review what we know. Michael's baptism states that Ingeborg Knudsdatter is his mother. That record came from the same village from which my Ingeborg emigrated in 1869. On Ancestry and 23andMe, Judy and I share matches with her known relatives and with my known relatives on that branch of our family trees. And Judy triangulates on a segment of chromosome 5 with me and 3 other people who are connected to this branch. So in this case, not one single piece totally proved that Ingeborg is Michael's mom, but when you put all of the pieces together, it forms, we have enough evidence to form a compelling proof argument that yes, I believe Ingeborg is Michael's mom. So next one. A couple of years ago, I looked at my Ancestry DNA matches one day. Now, when you get your list of matches, keep in mind that just about every day you're going to get new matches. At least every week you're going to get new autosomal DNA matches. So keep an eye on them. One day, actually, I was sitting in the kitchen at the Tarpon Library eating my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I looked at my autosomal DNA matches, and I had a new match, Jenny from Texas. Jenny and I are a really close match, 918 centimorgans. That's a really close match. I had no idea who Jenny was. Now, my first thought at 918 centimorgans is she's a first cousin. Well, I know all my first cousins. I grew up with them. I didn't know Jenny. So I looked at the shared centimorgans. And according to Blaine's chart, Jenny and I could be, of course, first cousins. We also could be half aunt, half niece relationship. We also could be a great aunt, great niece, or a great grandmother, great granddaughter relationship. So 918 centimorgans doesn't zero in only on first cousins. There are other relationships that could share that many centimorgans. Well, Jenny and I don't know each other, but we started communicating through Ancestry. Now, Jenny had seen me and was just as confused and perplexed as I was to see her. So we kind of tiptoed into our conversations, our email conversations with each other, because we didn't want to upset anybody's apple cart. But right away, we realized we were going to upset an apple cart. Now, Jenny and I are close enough in age to rule out the great aunt, great grandmother relationship. We're not exactly the same age, but we're close enough to rule that relationship out. So we went back to first cousins and half aunt and half niece. Once again, we were tiptoeing as we were talking to each other because we didn't want to insult each other's ancestors, but somebody had a misattributed parent along the road, and so we were trying to figure out who that was. Well, I asked Jenny to upload her Ancestry DNA results to GEDmatch. Partly like a second opinion, I wanted to see her in another database to see if the same number of centimorgans would appear, or at least an approximate number of centimorgans would appear. but also because GEDmatch allows us more tools. Ancestry doesn't allow us to see the individual segment information that might identify exactly where Jenny and I match DNA. So I asked her to upload to GEDmatch, which she did right away. And what we learned, first of all, we shared right about the same number of centimorgans on GEDmatch as we did on Ancestry. But the second thing we saw was we shared no X DNA. Now, to have that close of a match and share no X DNA is significant. It means that between each me and Jenny and our most recent common ancestor, who we still haven't figured out who that is, somewhere between her relationship with that most recent common ancestor or my relationship with that most recent common ancestor, there had to been a father to son connection on either one of those sides that would, because fathers only pass down Y DNA to their sons and no X. There had to be a father-son connection. So what did I do with that information? Oh, first of all, to backtrack a tiny bit, Jenny and I both used Ancestry's Shared Matches tool to determine that we matched on our respective paternal lines. Both Jenny and I have close enough DNA matches, and actually our own mom's DNA. I didn't match Jenny's mom and she didn't match my mom. So we confirmed that we matched on our respective paternal lines. That was the first thing we did. And then we went on to look at that X DNA and we realized that there had to have been a father to son relationship in between Jenny and I and our most recent common ancestor. Here's that little picture of the 22 pairs of chromosomes and the X and the Y. So what I did was, I knew it was on my dad's side of the family. So I lined up, I took out a piece of paper and a pencil and I wrote down every single one of my male relatives on my dad's side of the family that could have had anything to do with Jenny's parentage, including my own big brothers, because they were older teenagers at the time that Jenny was born. And so I didn't even rule out my brothers, and nobody got a pass, whether they were married or not. I was looking at the science. I listed them all. Now, I do remember I have my Uncle Pat's DNA. That was extremely helpful in this case, because as I made a list of all of the people, all of the guys on my dad's side of the family that could have had anything to do with Jenny's parentage, and I listed then using Blaine's shared centimorgan chart, I listed how many centimorgans of DNA that each of these guys would share with both Uncle Pat and me if they were Jenny's father. And I could do that using Blaine's shared centimorgan chart. In every single case, all of these gentlemen would share more DNA with my uncle than they would with me if they were Jenny's father. And I share way more DNA with Jenny than my Uncle Pat does. And every single guy on the page would share more DNA with my uncle, except for one. There was only one possibility in which I would share more DNA with Jenny than my Uncle Pat. And that possibility was my dad. If I had a half brother through my dad, and he was Jenny's father, she and I would be half aunt, half niece, sharing between 500 centimorgans and 1,446 centimorgans, with about an average of 891 centimorgans, and Jenny and I share 918. Bam. Now, Y DNA would be another great tool, because obviously Uncle Pat, I have Uncle Pat's Y DNA, I have my own brother's Y DNA, and I don't have my dad's Y DNA. Unfortunately, Jenny's dad, my new brother from another mother, died several years ago. And that's what's so sad here. Now, as Drew mentioned earlier this morning, finding a surprise family member is extremely normal. It's happening more and more. I read somewhere, and I wish I could find exactly who put these numbers together, but I read somewhere that 25% of us DNA testers find a surprise close family member. That's crazy, right? So here I am with a new surprise brother from another mother. Now, in my case, everyone who could be emotionally impacted by this news was already gone, including my mother, my father, and Jenny's dad. He grew up, and Jenny knows this. Jenny's mom knows this. He grew up believing somebody else was his dad. So of course he's going to be emotionally impacted by this, but he's gone. So in this case, everybody who is emotionally impacted by this has died. My brothers I grew up with, I have two of them, and Jenny and her family, her mom, actually just thinks it's kind of fun and exciting to have a new family member. Jenny and I are great pen pals. Now she, of course, is still in Texas, but we're great pen pals, and we've shared pictures and all sorts of family stories. So it hasn't emotionally impacted us. But keep in mind, DNA, a surprise DNA family member can rock people's worlds. So move carefully. And like I said, as Jenny and I first approached each other and started talking, we kind of tiptoed because we didn't know how much of each other's worlds would be rocked. So, okay, we think we've figured out through the science that Jenny and I are half aunt, half niece. What does the paper trail show? Well, Jenny's grandma, who was, of course, her dad's mom, named her then husband as her son's father on all known documents. So that's the gentleman that Tom, that's Jenny's dad's name, that Tom grew up believing was his dad. So did my dad and Jenny's grandmas, did their paths cross? Oh yeah. Not only did they grow up together in the same suburb of Minneapolis, but they served together at the same naval base during World War II. So yeah, their paths crossed. So yeah, we're pretty sure we're right. There really isn't any other possibility. And so there's the sailor in question. He's awfully good looking. I understand how Jenny's grandma fell for him. Anyway, a close match, like a half niece, can be reasonably confirmed without autosomal DNA, even if the paper trail shows otherwise. Now, once again, this didn't rock our worlds. This happened actually long before my dad came home from the Navy and met my mom. So did I ever tell my mom? No. She's gone now, but I never told her. It was information she didn't need to know. But once again, this did happen before my dad met my mom and settled down. So I think we've seen two examples. One where we have to kind of pull evidence together from a few different places to help to put our DNA to work for us. And now we've shown an example with a close match that, yeah, you don't need the paper trail. The autosomal DNA evidence can do a pretty good job in and of itself. So, so we have time for questions. I'm going to follow up. Remember I said I'm going to follow up with a slide that talks about success as a DNA newbie. Before I knew anything, I was probably only a couple of weeks after I got DNA results. I saw on a match list, I saw a name I recognized. And actually, it was kind of a distant relative, my great-grandfather's sibling, married into this family, but I recognized the last name, so I wrote to him. His name is Bob. And I sent Bob an email, and I just was friendly, and I said, hey, I recognize your surname, and I think that this is how we're connected. And he wrote back, and he said, yeah, I see, that's probably how we're connected. And he said, I'm not really the genealogist in the family, my wife Linda is. Let me turn you over to her. So Linda and I started sending email and conversing via email. And Linda said one day, she said, you know, Denise, Bob and I just got a whole package of old photographs from the 1800s from this branch of the family. Do you have any of these? I said, no. Now, actually, this Norwegian branch of the family homesteaded land in northwestern Minnesota, and I know they're very practical Norwegians up there. I grew up with these guys. And I knew that any extra money they had probably went into the farm and not into professional photography. So when no one in my family, my mom, my aunts, my grandma, nobody had old photographs from this branch of the family. So I figured they probably weren't any. Well, there were. They did spend some money on professional photography. And lo and behold, they came down Bob's branch of the family. Now, Bob lives in Colorado and I live in Florida. The odds of Bob and I and Linda meeting up in any other way than DNA is highly unlikely. But dear Linda spent a Saturday evening scanning and emailing these old photos to me. Now, she wanted me to have big images, and so it took a while. There's probably 12 of these old photographs, and she would email me. She'd say, okay, I sent 3 now. Do you have 3? And then she'd send another one, and it probably took us an hour and a half to get these big files to me. But what a treasure. This alone, when I was done that evening and thanked Linda, I thought this alone is worth the $99 I spent on that DNA test. I was a DNA newbie. I still hadn't figured it out, but I realized this stuff works. So it works. Even if you don't know anything about DNA yet, keep at it. So putting DNA to work. We can validate our existing research. We can reasonably confirm close relationships. We can lend evidence to more distant relationships and hopefully put enough compelling evidence together to prove something. And we can share family treasures, which hands down is the most valuable. So I did talk a little longer than I planned to. I'm sorry, I get started. But I think we still have some time for questions, right, Chris? Jenny? So let me stop sharing. There's Jenny back. Hey, Jenny.
Hi, Denise. Thanks very much. That was just wonderful. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 quick questions.
Oops, I lost you again. How did I lose you? Oh, well, just, okay, I'm back.
Sure. One quick question is, you've mentioned that taking the DNA test can bring back some unexpected results and shake up your family. Do you have any references or recommendations of resources that can help if we find something like that in our own family?
Yes, actually there's a support group, and I can't remember the email address there is a support group for surprises in your DNA results. Let me find that information. If you're interested in that, send me an email and I'll get an answer. I'll get an answer for you, because yes, I have heard that there's support out there because it's very common.
Awesome. Thanks very much. So with that, we'll wrap it up for today, but we do have Denise's email in the chat box. So if you have anything to follow up with, you can chat with her there. And don't forget that we're giving away a couple copies of 5 copies of Your DNA Guide, the book. So check your emails for that, and hopefully you'll be a winner. And Chris, anything else you want to throw in?
Yeah, just throw up a slide here. If you'd like to contact the library, you can call the number here on the screen, or you can go online at hcplc.org/contact. And of course, you can learn about what the Family Heritage Festival was about and the events we had at the landing page at hcplc.org/familyhistory. And of course, the library has a lot of genealogy resources that you can access at hcplc.org/research/genealogy. It's been a great few days with this festival. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Denise. And thank you, everyone, for coming in and listening and taking part. Have a great rest of your weekend, everyone. Take care.
Thanks for inviting me. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye.